Hey everyone, welcome back to Shimmer's podcast. Today's guest is AC Wise. Hi AC.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being a guest today. So can you tell our listeners when did you first realize you wanted to be an author? Like what was your inspiration?
It's probably, I would say, almost a lifelong ambition. I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing. As a kid, I sort of wrote, little, I wouldn't even call them stories. They were like, 2 to 3 sentence things where I was, telling little stories. And eventually I kind of realized that, there's an actual author behind the books that I love to read as a kid, and thought, hey, maybe I could do that when I grow up.
So who was your favorite author back then? Or when you first started?
That's a good question. I feel like the first stuff I started off with was fairy tales, and eventually I discovered the works of Ray Bradbury, and he was, a big inspiration, I think, especially with short fiction. Um, you know, it sort of took me a while to realize that short stories could be just as powerful as novels. So he was definitely an early influence on me. And I'd say also the scary stories to tell in the dark, all the sort of like folk tales and ghost stories and retold urban legends. That would be another big influence early on.
I remember those scary stories to tell in the dark. I remember those.
They're fantastic.
Yeah, those were actually really scary to me.
They really are, and especially the illustrations too. Like you look back on it and you're like, oh, how did this not completely traumatize me as a kid?
Right, because they made a movie off of it, and I was like, "This is scary for a kids thing." I was like, "I'm scared, terrified." So, can you tell listeners what inspired your book, Wendy, Darling?
Sure. So it's kind of a take on the Peter Pan story, and it picks up with Wendy Darling as an adult, sort of long after she's been in Neverland with Peter Pan. She has a daughter of her own now, and basically in the intervening years, she's been institutionalized because nobody believes her when she talks about this fantasy land that she went to and this boy without a shadow who never grows up. So her brothers kind of, they've forgotten about Neverland. They put her away for her own good. After that, she gets out of the institution, she gets married, she has a daughter, and then out of nowhere, Peter returns and takes her daughter away to Neverland, thinking that it's Wendy. So she sets off basically to go rescue her daughter, kind of having realized in the intervening years that maybe Peter isn't exactly, the good guy she thought he was when she was a kid. That he's sort of, going around serially kidnapping children, and took her daughter without, asking her daughter, asking her, all that. So it sort of starts off with her setting off to rescue her daughter Jane and bring her home from Neverland.
Wow, I love it. I love Peter Pan as a kid. I still love Peter Pan. Wow, have you ever pitched like your stories to screenwriters or anything to make it a movie? Like it sounds really good.
Unfortunately, that's not really under my control, but I would love that, if somebody wanted to pick it up and do something with it someday.
Man, I'm gonna see what I can do and pitch this story to them. Like I'm gonna be like, hey, this sounds like a really good story. So you already told me how you develop the characters and stuff. So what's your favorite chapter and why?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I actually really like, it might sound weird, but like the opening, it actually started off as a short story that was published in a magazine called Daily Science Fiction. They do sort of flash fiction, less than 2,000 words. So it kind of started off as this like self-contained 2,000 word story that I never thought would go beyond that. And, people actually reacted to it very well. And then I started thinking about it more and more and realized, oh, I actually want to see Wendy go on this adventure to rescue her daughter, because the original story basically ends with her just about to set out to Neverland. And I was kind of thinking about the way, especially so many stories kind of aimed at young adults, mothers are sort of in the background or they're absent. And it really is focused on the younger generation, which makes sense for, again, fairy tales or young adult things, to have the characters of an age with the readers that they're aimed at. But you don't get to see mothers go on adventures all that often. And I thought it would be kind of fun to have Wendy as a mother kind of at the center of her own story, being a hero and going on an adventure. And I just realized that was a story I wanted to read, so I wrote it.
So I do have a question. So in your book, does Wendy have her wings? Like, is she a fairy? Like when she goes, like
She does remember how to fly. She doesn't have wings, but with the whole, Neverland and people can fly there, she does kind of remember how to fly and realizes she can do it without Peter's help. And part of it is just almost like sort of the adrenaline effect of wanting to rescue her daughter kind of
yeah.
takes away, the doubt that of course people can't fly. This is not a rational thing, but in order to save her daughter, she kind of puts all that doubt out of her mind and just believes that she can do it, and she is able to fly back to Neverland and go after her daughter.
Yeah, I love it. So who's your favorite character? Of course, Wendy.
Well, I'm pretty fond of Wendy, but actually I like her daughter too, and in sort of the companion novel that's coming out next year focuses more on Captain Hook, and I, as more, I guess maybe anti-hero is he's still not a great guy. He's still a bit of a villain, but you kind of see some of the reasoning why behind it, of sort of being tormented for years and years and years by this child who's kind of, kept him and all the pirates captive in Neverland to play with his toys. So I'm pretty fond of Hook as a character too.
Yeah. So can you give our listeners like a brief summary of Wendy, darling?
Sure. I guess the best way to say it would almost be like a sequel to Peter Pan that follows Wendy as an adult, setting off to rescue her daughter and sort of reckon with her past and reckon with sort of the trauma of having, been in Neverland and not being believed on it. So it's kind of like a feminist take, and sort of a woman reclaiming her story and reclaiming her truth and facing down her childhood demons, I guess, would be a good way to put it, maybe.
I love it. I love it. So can you tell our listeners what inspired Hook? So you mentioned that a little bit. So can you tell us what inspired it?
Yeah. So I sort of, knew I probably wouldn't have room to kind of put Hook in the first book, but kind of as I was writing it, I had this in mind of that might be an interesting story to tell as well. So I kind of left some threads that hint at it in Wendy Darling, and then kind of went back and wanted to fill that story in, because I think it's just sort of interesting in that, Neverland sort of as conceived in the original Peter Pan story, it's, basically all children. And then here's this like one adult who's, stuck in this land with his pirates, and it's just sort of this weird situation. Like, what would it be like for him? And the fact that, Peter is always supposed to win, and, this band of adult pirates can't beat this group of children. What's going on here? So I figured there had to be sort of more to that story. And it's, the way I conceive it is sort of, Neverland is a place that responds to Peter's whims, and he's kind of set up the whole world so that, he does always win, and that this band of untrained boys, the Lost Boys, can beat these, fully grown men who are pirates and, presumably have a little bit more experience in the world than these children that Peter just sort of serially kidnaps. So I kind of wanted to explore, what it would be like to be sort of, perpetually stuck in this world, and sort of actually perpetually killed and perpetually resurrected just to continue to be Peter's ultimate enemy. So, it was kind of fun. I mean, villains are kind of fun to write and fun to play with. And I just figured there's so much darkness in the original Peter Pan story that was sort of interesting to delve into and explore and kind of imagine, what the story behind the story, or the story around the edges of the original story, would be.
Yeah, I love it that you're doing this, because it's like you can make stories off of the Disney characters. Like, the Disney characters.
Exactly,
like, yeah. So is there anything else you're going to add on to it? Like, are you going to come out with other books related to this particular Disney movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be just those two for this, and then I haven't actually figured out what I'm going to do next.
So within Hook, okay, so are you starting out like with your Hook book? Is he going to be like a normal person too in the outside world and brought back, or he is?
Yeah,
Oh.
so it sort of, goes a little bit into his history, how he ended up in Neverland, and then how he ends up back in London again, kind of as an older man.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of moves back and forth in time, and tells a little bit of his history before Neverland, a little bit of his history in Neverland, and then a little bit of what happened to him since escaping Neverland. And he and Wendy and Jane, Wendy's daughter, kind of all encounter each other in London, and kind of all have to again sort of deal with the fallout of Neverland and how it's affected their lives.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this. Like my mouth's open the whole time because it just brings back my childhood memories from watching Peter Pan, and I'm like,
Yeah.
and they so many stories of Peter Pan, and yeah, because I remember wasn't Robert Williams one of them?
Yeah, there was the Robin Williams version. There is, I mean, I feel like, it's kind of a story that's rich for reimagining. There's been, I feel like quite a few movie versions at this point, and I've seen actually quite a few books too that sort of take off Peter Pan and
Yeah.
reimagine it in that way.
Yeah, I would like to see yours though in like its own universe. Like, you know how they have Marvel universe, like in DC universe. I would like to see yours in. Yeah, that would be neat.
I would love that too.
So, what advice would you give our listeners who want to pursue a writing career such as yourself?
One thing I would say is read widely, actually, you know, and see what else is kind of out there in the type of stuff that you want to write, is a good way to sort of get inspiration. And another thing that I've actually found incredibly valuable is finding either a good critique partner or a critique group, so that you kind of have like another person to bounce ideas off of, and they can kind of help you see some of the spots that it's easy to get very deep in your own head when you're writing, and you kind of like, what you're trying to say, but it's hard to know whether it actually makes sense to anybody who lives outside of your head. So I found it really, really valuable to have sort of a group of people that, we sort of exchange writing with each other. We can help each other kind of, find where those weak spots are, or find where maybe things aren't, being communicated as clearly as we think they are. And that way you also kind of have people to celebrate when things go well. You have people to kind of commiserate when things aren't going as well. It's just nice to kind of have a network of friends who are going through the same journey of writing, because it can often be a solitary activity when you're, just doing the writing or editing. But to have other people that you can kind of, tap into and share with is really, really nice. And I find it incredibly valuable just to have, other sets of eyes, other opinions on my work to help make it stronger.
That's true. That's true. That's really great advice, because I have like a large, I guess it would be range of authors on my Facebook, and some of them I haven't interviewed and some of them I have, and I'm like, any authors want to be interviewed? And there was like 30 to 40 people. I'm like, wow. I should have said that.
Yeah. Like everybody tells one person, they tell one person, then suddenly
Yeah.
you have.
That's true. That's true. And also the advice you gave, I wanted to start writing my own book, but I'm scared because some of the authors, they'll post like the negative reviews. I'm like, I don't think I want to hear those kind of reviews. Like, I'll be scared. But yeah, because you work so hard on your books. You work so hard. You put a lot of thought in, a lot of time on it, just for it to get a one review for something that they can't explain. Like, sometimes they just do it just because, and I'm just like, I don't know if I can handle that. You all have
there's so many people that kind of decide in advance that, they want a story to be something specific, and when it doesn't match what they have in their head. The example I always like to use is like, well, I was in the mood for chocolate chip cookie and this is an oatmeal cookie, so I'm mad at it. Well, it's like, judge it on being a chocolate chip cookie, not what you wanted it to be, which is an oatmeal cookie.
Right. I don't know how y'all can handle the negative reviews. Like, how do you handle the bad reviews? Like,
I mean, I sort of, read them kind of out of curiosity, but also, kind of take them with a grain of salt, in terms of like, there's so many factors I think that even go into reading and reviewing. Like, a person might have, been having a bad day, or they're reading quickly because they have such a volume of work that they're committed to review that, they're not going to necessarily pick up on everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they might misread something, or it might just not be for them. I mean, something that one person loves might not connect with another person. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, that's not the right reader for your work. But
That's true.
I don't want to say I don't take it seriously, but I try not to, sort of let myself get mired in, oh, what are other people going to think of this? So I shouldn't do it because it might be badly reviewed, or, you kind of have to sort of let it go at a certain point of like, it's out there in the world, and hopefully it'll find the readers who love it and connect with it. And it's not going to connect with everybody, but that's okay.
That's true. I want to thank you so much for coming on my podcast today and chatting with me.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
You have a great day.
You're like a circle that floats around me, keeping me safe and sound. And when I fall, you tied a rope to me.